Hi, Lissa DeHart here. Today I want to share an excerpt from my longer video on the 5 key insights for passing the ICF Credentialing Exam. So I hope you find this useful, and if you'd like to have the longer video, you can find all the information in the links below. So thank you so much, and I hope find this useful. Cheers. So let's look at the second one. So we've got the question is, a client is struggling with delegating tasks at work to other team members. During the last session, the client shared that an important project they're leading is falling behind schedule. The coach supported the client to identify strategies to delegate tasks to other team members. At the next session, the client reports back and shares, in the end, I decided to complete all the tasks myself. That was the only way I was going to get it done on time. The coach feels disappointed that the client didn't follow through with their plan to delegate. What should the coach do? Who here has had this client where they say they're going to do something and then they do something completely different? Not that it's good or bad, but they just like, hey, I'm going to just kind of go off road and do something completely different than what I said I would do. So again, we have these 4 answers that are possible, and we're looking for the best one right now. Immediately reflect back on their last session with the client and identify what they could have done differently to support the client to follow through on their plan. Take a breath and acknowledge the client is responsible for their own choice, whether to follow through with the stated plan or not, right? Set aside their disappointment for now and focus on the current session with the client. Decide to reflect on this situation during an upcoming session with their mentor coach, or 4, praise the client for meeting the project deadlines, but ask why the client failed to support the team members' development. So why is 2 the right answer? What is it that allows that answer to be, because everybody's coming up with 2. So what makes this the best answer?
I was conflicted between 2 and 3.
What made 2?
And I decided on 2 because it's like the commitment to having it be about the client. It's all about the client, and they decided to do something different. So I'm letting it go completely instead of setting it aside, because if it's on the side, it might creep in. I might be like, when do I schedule my mentor coaching?
Yeah. Now it's about me and my needs, right?
And it's about, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
It's also in line with that, seeing the client as whole, resourceful, capable, and creative.
Yeah. This is really client-centered. It is, thank you. So I've gotten client-centered, right? From a few people here. And yeah, it's client-centered. Take a breath, shake it off. I may have had a desire or a wish or a hope that the client would follow through because, learning to set boundaries and delegate's a great strategy. But in that moment, the client made a decision for themselves. Let's talk about what they learned from it. It doesn't matter that they didn't do what they said they were going to do. What have they learned? What have they explored? And so we need to be able to take that breath and move on. So yeah, thank you for looking at that too, Mihaela, because yeah, competency 2.1. And it really also has to do with trust. It has to do with clients being at choice. It has to do with the coach not leading the client. If I say to them, hey, I noticed that you didn't do, what could I have done differently? I'm bringing myself into the equation. If I focus on what I need to do for myself in order to be okay with this, I'm focusing on myself and praising the client for meeting the deadlines, but then asking them why they failed to support their team members in development is very clearly a judgment bias sort of question. Right now, we're kind of putting them on the spot, like you did it wrong. You got it done, but you did it wrong. Right? Versus they did what they did. What are we going to learn from that? So now we're going to move to which one is the worst action they could possibly take. Yeah, so lots of people coming up with number 4. So praise the client for meeting the project deadline, but ask why the client failed to support their team members. We got a couple of people saying 1 and most of the people saying 4. So the correct answer is 4. So why is 4 the worst? And I just alluded to it a second ago.
Judgment. But Lisa, this is going to be very hard because like, how do I measure the degree of worse? So we were talking about these tensions of like client-centered and coach-centered. So if I'm thinking of that tension, I'm like, well, number 1 is most coach-centered plus, and number 4 also plus the judgment. So it's like coach-centered plus judgment equals worse. And then coach-centered is like second worst. So I think I can identify the best most of the time, but the worst is going to be very hard for me because like, how do I evaluate worst?
So one of the reasons that I think that number 1 is not great, but not the worst, is it's the coach taking ownership of the client's progress. But when the coach is praising the client, they're also taking responsibility in some ways. They're taking ownership of this in some way because they're now making a designation of good or bad. And there's the added element of judgment to it. And so, you know, it's a tough one. I'm not going to say this is going to be easy, but I want you to be thinking like praising the client for meeting the deadline versus reflecting back that the client said they were going to do something different. I think what makes number 1 the worst is not the worst, but just not good, is because the coach is bringing themselves into the equation. But when they're praising the client, they're bringing themselves into the equation also. The one that is, you know, the setting aside their disappointment now and focusing on the current session with the client and deciding to reflect on this later is clearly just not the worst, because even though it's the coach is sort of centered on themselves, they're also sort of setting it to the side, which makes it not the best, but also not the worst. You know, this is really going to be where I would encourage you to go to ICF and download these 8 questions and really pay attention to the nuance, because I think I used the word nuance earlier. It is very nuanced. I think it was the addition of the judgment to this one that makes it the worst.